What's the most disturbing thing you've ever witnessed? I was in the Navy for 9 years. I did 3 deployments, all of them on the USS Abraham Lincoln. My first mission was in the fall of 2004. We were in Hong Kong for Christmas. I'm not 100% sure of the exact date we pulled out of port. I think it was December 27th. We were supposed to head to Korea after Hong Kong, but as soon as we hit open water, the ship turned south. We had all heard about the tsunami, and it wasn't hard to guess where we were really going. When we arrived off the coast of Sumatra, near Banda Aceh, the first thing we did was head to the side of the island where the current was pushing everything. The water was filthy, completely saturated with debris. At that moment, it didn't really cross our minds what else could be floating in that water besides wood and trash. I was working on the flight deck right after we got there when I heard a yell coming from one of the outer catwalks. I headed over thinking someone had gotten hurt or that they'd messed something up on an aircraft. When I reached the catwalk, I found a group of people pointing frantically at the water. I looked down and saw a mass of debris, but at first, I couldn't identify anything specific. Then I saw a pale-colored blob. It took a second for my eyes to focus, but then I realized I was looking at the corpse of a baby. It was missing a leg, but the diaper was still on. In that instant, my mind just shut off. It wouldn't let me have a single conscious thought about what I had just seen. Later that night, I was out in one of the smoking areas, leaning on the railing and just numbly staring at the water. I had this weird, ominous feeling that something bad was going to happen. I was trying to shake it off, thinking it was just shock from seeing the baby earlier. Just as I started to calm down a bit, I saw another corpse. This one was a woman. All of her clothes had been shredded. The body was pale and bloated, and the head was gone. We spent about a month off the coast of Banda Aceh. We used the ship's desalination plant to produce fresh water to send ashore. We also exhausted our stores of food and medical supplies to provide aid to the survivors. Our helicopters flew from first light until it was too dark to see. We actually lost a helicopter while we were there. It was about 300 feet up when it lost power and dropped straight into a rice field. Everyone survived. The worst injury was a dislocated hip. A good friend of mine was supposed to be on that helo, but he swapped shifts with someone else at the last minute. Those of us who were willing got the chance to go ashore and help with the relief efforts. We'd fly in on a helicopter in the morning and spend the day loading supplies onto trucks and other helos to get them to the people who needed them. As we flew toward the coast, I watched the shoreline get closer. We flew over what looked like a very dirty beach, the kind where currents pile up trash or where people just dump their waste. But as we got a little further inland, I started seeing straight lines, squares, and rectangles. I realized that what I was looking at were the remains of a town. The waves had raised it so completely that only the foundations were left. I don't have a photographic memory, but I have snapshots of certain things that will never leave me. 3 of them are the images of those 2 corpses, and those little squares barely sticking out of the mud. It's been almost 8 years, and I can still see them as clearly as if it were yesterday. Cultural note. The 2004 tsunami reached a magnitude of 9.3, making it one of the most powerful ever recorded. The wave struck the coasts of 14 countries, claiming the lives of more than 227,000 people. The USS Abraham Lincoln CVN-72 is a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier that played a crucial humanitarian role in Operation Unified Assistance, serving as a mobile logistics base in Sumatra. It utilized its advanced desalination plant to deliver up to 400,000 gallons of drinking water daily to the survivors of Banda Aceh, the capital of Indonesia's Aceh province. Due to its geographical location, it was the area most devastated by the disaster. where the force of the impact swept entire cities down to their foundations. I witnessed a father swerve to miss a driver who had fallen asleep at the wheel, only to watch that car slam head-on into his wife's vehicle, which was right behind him. I was the first person on the scene. Initially, I ran to the wife's car. Her sternum was completely crushed, and at first, I thought the little daughter with her was dead. Then I headed to the other driver's car, a teenager, to check on him. He was pretty banged up. The door was trashed and fluids were leaking everywhere, so I pulled him out through the window and carried him to the side of the road. I used an extra t-shirt I had on hand to improvise a tourniquet. The kid looked me dead in the eyes and asked if anyone was hurt. I didn't say a word, I just stared back at him. He knew exactly what that meant. He broke down right then and there, and I stayed with him, trying to calm him down, telling him it was an accident and that his life would go on until the police arrived. He was coming back from soccer practice or something and simply nodded off. At some point during the chaos, the father who was driving the first car made it to his wife's wreck and let out a scream that will stay with me forever. It was a sound of absolute terror and helplessness. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. However, moments later, his daughter started crying, letting us all know she wasn't dead. The wife died instantly, and the daughter was in critical condition for a long time. As for me, I couldn't cross the street properly for days, and the smell of radiator fluid stayed with me forever. The accident happened in Haynesville, Illinois, just outside of Grayslake, probably between 2001 and 2002. By the way, the movie The Butterfly Effect messed with me for a long time after that. It made me think way too much about how a single second changes everything. This happened about 4 years ago, right after I got my driver's license. I remember I was heading home on a rainy day in March. On one stretch of the highway, a motorcycle roared past me doing at least 85 or 90 miles per hour in a 55 zone. It was like seeing a green wasp flying at full tilt on my left. It went by so fast, I barely caught a flash of color. The only thing I could think at that moment was, well, this idiot is asking for it. 5 minutes later, I came across the scene. There were body parts scattered all over the highway. The motorcycle was embedded, buried deep into the back of a truck. The guy's body was in pieces all around the rear bumper, and his head was still rolling down the asphalt in front of the truck. The vehicle he hit was an old piece of Russian machinery, the kind built to be literally indestructible. Needless to say, the ambulance that was on its way wasn't coming to save anyone. They were just coming to scrape what was left of him off the pavement. After that, I became extremely cautious. Whenever I see a motorcycle nearby, I try to keep as much distance as I can. I go on high alert. It also left me so terrified that I couldn't touch a steering wheel for an entire week. It's an image that just won't fade, no matter how hard you try. Cultural note. The term Russian machinery in the context of heavy vehicles typically refers to brands like Kamaz or ZIL, known for their rugged engineering and extremely rigid steel chassis, which lack the crumple zones found in modern vehicles. The Green Wasp is a common nickname for Kawasaki sport bikes, famous for their signature lime green color and their ability to reach high speeds in seconds. In the United States, these bikes are often associated with squid culture riders who take extreme risks without proper protective gear. My God, what happened to me wasn't nearly as graphic as that, but it was enough to leave a permanent mark on me. I was driving a friend to the airport in the middle of a torrential downpour. As we were cruising down the interstate, a car cut me off so aggressively that I had to swerve to avoid a collision. In that split second, the back of my car clipped the front of a semi-truck. It was a nightmare. My car basically got hooked onto the front of the rig. I was dragged and pushed for what felt like an eternity before the truck driver could even start to slow down. At that point, my car finally broke loose. The wheels tried to auto-correct from the momentum, and the vehicle went flying until it slammed into the median. I am convinced that if it hadn't been raining, my car would have flipped, and I'd probably be dead right now. The wet asphalt allowed the car to slide instead of rolling over. My parents came to pick me up after the crash, and miraculously, we still managed to get my friend to the airport so he wouldn't miss his flight. As soon as he got out of the car and said goodbye, I just broke down. I started sobbing uncontrollably. I guess I was still in total shock from the adrenaline dump. I went home and slept for the rest of the day, completely drained. As you can imagine, it took me a very long time to feel capable of driving in the rain again. Every drop on the windshield reminded me of that endless push against the truck's metal grille. I've told this on Reddit before, but, well, here it goes again. I was about 13 years old. My friends and I were at a party in the North Toronto area, and just as we were leaving, a fight broke out in the street right in front of us. We stayed frozen, watching as a group of guys gave a dude a beating for several minutes. At the end, they dragged him over and threw him against the edge of the curb. The guy tried to weakly protest, but he was drunk, and had already been hit way too hard. The 3 or 4 guys who had him pinned against the ground had no trouble at all controlling him. I know I should have left at that moment, but curiosity or shock kept me glued to the ground. I didn't really understand what they were doing until they forced him to bite the edge of the concrete. At that point, most of my friends looked away, but I kept staring long enough to see them kick the back of his head. It wasn't something you could consider graphic or bloody in that instant, mainly because it was dark, and I didn't manage to see any blood, but I saw how his head jerked forward in an abrupt way. His mouth opened much wider than any human mouth should ever open. What surprised me the most, and what disturbs me to this day, was the silence. He didn't make any noise, or at least I couldn't hear anything from where I was. After that, all my friends and I went running away as fast as we could, terrified that those men had seen us watching. I never found out if the guy survived or not. Nothing came out in the local news, or at least nothing that I saw, so I tried to convince myself that he survived and is doing okay, even though my mind tells me otherwise every time I remember that dry movement of his head. Like what you see? Subscribe to the Reddit Oracle for more. I went through a lot of things while working as an administrator in the emergency room of a children's hospital, but there is one story that still haunts me. It didn't happen at the hospital, but on the road to Avalon, New Jersey. What I saw fly out of that car, silhouetted against the traffic lights, is something I can't get out of my head. That night, I left the hospital late and was driving toward the coast, where my parents had rented a house for the week. During the entire trip down the Atlantic City Expressway, I kept crossing paths with a guy about my age, driving an old Chevy from the 80s. We were going to the same place at the same time, so we saw each other at every toll and every exit. When we started heading down the main road toward Avalon, he was right in front of me. On one side of the road there were 2 minivans pulled over. They were 2 families vacationing together who had missed their exit. Apparently, they decided to pull a U-turn to get back to the main road, and the first minivan did it out of nowhere without looking. The guy in the Chevy and I were going about 10 miles per hour over the limit, nothing out of the ordinary considering it was a 2-mile straightaway, and it was already late. The Chevy slammed into the back of the minivan at about 55 miles per hour. The impact literally ripped the back end off the van. At that moment, under the headlights of the oncoming cars, I saw a shower of luggage and a body flying through the air. I slammed on my brakes and ran toward what was left of the minivan. The driver was searching through the suitcases scattered on the ground, screaming desperately for his baby. In the back seat, There were two other older children, still buckled in. They were physically fine, but they were screaming non-stop, "Where's Mommy? Where's Mommy?" I found the baby in the front half of the car, asleep in her car seat. She didn't have a single scratch. Then the driver started screaming for his wife. I pointed toward the road, where I saw a heap about 200 feet away. We ran over there. She was alive, but she didn't look like a person anymore. She was a mass of broken bones and blood. By that point, someone who had gotten out of the stopped cars started trying to give her first aid. Knowing my limits, I decided to go look for help. This was before cell phones were common. I had to knock on the windows of at least 3 cars before I found someone who had a car phone integrated into their vehicle. It took the paramedics 10 minutes to arrive. The baby survived, but the mother was thrown out and landed as a pile of mangled flesh. For a long time, I couldn't erase the image of her body flying against the nightlights from my mind. This isn't nearly as terrible as seeing it live, but it's something that stayed burned into my mind forever. I'm talking about the old days of dial-up internet. Before torrents, we're talking about the era of Napster and Kazaa. Back then, anything you downloaded took an eternity, and files were almost never labeled correctly. I was a teenager, and all I wanted was the latest Britney Spears video. So with all the excitement in the world, I clicked download and waited patiently for the several hours it took to complete. Time passed, the download finished, and I was ready to watch some Baby one more time. But the video that opened wasn't music. The first thing I saw was a boot pressing hard against a young man's neck. You could hear laughing in the background while the man gasped desperately for air, and suddenly, a knife appeared. They drove it directly into his throat. To this day, I have no idea if what I saw was real or just a special effect from some horror movie. I still hate thinking about it, and since that day, I never downloaded videos or music again. I had a gut feeling that I'd have the bad luck of running into something similar. I recently discovered through comments from other people that it seems I actually witnessed a real murder that day, which makes me deeply sad. Maybe, deep down, I never wanted to know the truth. Cultural note: Napster and Kazaa were the pioneers of P2P, peer-to-peer networks, platforms where users shared files directly from one computer to another. Since there were no security filters or moderation, it was common for snuff videos, real-life violence, or viruses to be disguised under the names of popular pop songs. Dial-up refers to an internet connection via telephone lines, which was extremely slow, reaching maximum speeds of 56 kbps. This meant downloading a simple 4-minute music video could take anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, making the payoff of a wrong file even more psychologically damaging. 2 Christmas Eves ago, I was heading home from a bar when, right in front of my apartment, I saw a group of people standing in the middle of the street. As I got closer, the scene became clear and gruesome. A man was lying on the asphalt, screaming in pain. His bicycle was completely totaled about 15 feet away from him, and a trail of blood was running downhill along the pavement. Witnesses said it had been a hit and run. The cyclist was in such a deep state of shock that he started doing something disturbing. He began sticking his own fingers inside the wounds on his head. It was disgusting and profoundly sad. I had never felt so helpless in my entire life. The few minutes it took for emergency services to arrive felt like the longest moment of my existence. The man kept poking at his cuts in a totally confused and erratic way until a stranger passing by had to hold him down so he would stop hurting himself. Eventually, professional help arrived, and they took him to the hospital, but he didn't make it. He died shortly after. There is a stop sign now at the intersection where he was hit, but it still haunts me to think about it today. At the very least, I wish I had seen the car that hit him so I could have brought him justice. Rest in peace. Cultural note. A hit and run is a serious felony that in most U.S. jurisdictions is punishable by years in prison, especially if it results in death, as the failure to render aid drastically reduces the victim's chances of survival. The cyclist's behavior of sticking his fingers in his wounds is an extreme manifestation of hypovolemic or traumatic shock. In these cases, the lack of oxygen to the brain and sensory confusion can lead the victim to perform unconscious acts of self-mutilation or fail to recognize the severity of their own injuries. In the U.S., intersections with high accident rates often see ghost bicycles painted entirely white, placed as memorials to fallen riders. This past year, near my university, there was a car accident. It didn't seem like anything out of the ordinary. As we're in a rural area and people crash all the time, they usually wreck their cars, but they walk away fine. I was coming back from a dance class in the city, and one of the roads was closed so they could clean up after a crash. I didn't think much of it. Later that night, around 11:30, I got hungry. Since all the dining halls on campus were closed, I decided to drive to Sheetz. It was the same road that had been closed, but by then, they had already reopened it. Well, it turns out it wasn't completely clean. I guess it must have been a truly horrific accident. The main scene was cleared. There were no wrecked cars or bodies anymore, but the ground was covered in shattered glass. Right after passing the glass, I saw it. The entire stretch of road in front of me was soaked in blood, with bits of flesh mixed into it. I know it's not as terrifying as other stories told here because I didn't see people actually die, but what makes it horrible for me is that it didn't even move me until I thought about it later. At first, I saw the blood and just thought, oh right, the accident. But then reality hit me. Shit, that blood was someone's son, or someone's father. Someone probably loved those people so much they couldn't sleep at night. Someone kissed their faces and watched them sleep just to make sure they were breathing. Someone said goodbye to them that morning, never expecting they wouldn't come home. All that blood and flesh used to be inside a body, keeping it alive, and now it's just seeping into the pavement like it's the remains of an opossum or a squirrel. Now it's just a mess that someone has to clean up. While someone is going through the worst night of their life finding out their loved one was torn apart on a rural road, I just drove right over their blood to go buy a sandwich. Car accidents are truly terrifying things. When I was in high school, I was walking to a friend's house in Albuquerque, down one of the main avenues. Right as I was passing in front of a daycare center, I saw someone trying to make a left turn into the building's parking lot. The moment I crossed the entrance, I heard the screech of tires followed by a metallic roar. I looked back and saw that the person had turned directly into oncoming traffic. The driver must not have been wearing a seatbelt, because the impact was so violent that it threw him from the driver's seat all the way to the passenger side. His head went through the right window glass and hung lifelessly out of the car. Meanwhile, the car, which was already engulfed in flames and leaking fluids, started rolling slowly, right in my direction. I ran out of there as fast as I could. I was too scared, too traumatized, and too young to understand that I should have stayed to give my statement to the police. It was the first time I had ever seen an accident or anything that bloody, but what really scarred me happened as I was walking away. Traffic started to pile up, and people began honking their horns desperately, trying to dodge the slow lanes. One guy leaned out of his window and asked me, "Was there an accident?" "Yeah," I replied. "Damn it, I'm going to be late," he said, as he tried to merge back into another lane. His total indifference to what had just happened shocked me much more than the accident itself. I was about 7 or 8 years old when I was at the park with a friend. We were hanging out skipping stones across the surface of the lake, a normal game for kids. Suddenly, a flock of geese came around a bend in the water. My friend, without thinking much about the consequences, picked up a stone and threw it directly toward them. The stone skipped twice on the water, but on the second bounce, it caught an upward trajectory and hit one of the geese dead in the head. It was instantaneous and horrific. The animal's neck bent to one side as if it had snapped. The goose started honking and screaming in pure pain, a gut-wrenching sound that still haunts me. It started swimming toward the shore, right where we were standing. It was desperately trying to lift its head, but it couldn't. Its muscles just wouldn't respond anymore. When it got close enough, I saw the real damage the impact of the stone had punched a perfect hole in its skull. I could see its brain. I had a panic attack and ran away from there as fast as my legs would carry me. But it didn't help, because the image and that sound of agony were seared into my memory. As I write this, I can't help but cry to this day. It is one of the saddest and most disturbing things I've ever had to witness. I called animal control as soon as I got home, though to be honest, I doubt they did anything for it. Years later, while in college, life put me in a strange situation. I found an abandoned goose egg and decided to rescue it. I incubated it in my room until it hatched. I named him Eggy Fowler. Raising him, caring for him, and watching him grow up healthy became my form of redemption. Taking care of Eggy made me feel, for the first time, that I could forgive myself for what I witnessed at that lake. It was my way of paying off a debt I never asked for, but that broke my heart for far too long. A family friend had a broken gun that his father had given him. The absolute idiot thought it was funny to use it to scare people. He would point it at anyone, pull the trigger, and laugh his head off watching everyone else lose their cool. It was his form of entertainment, a piece of stupidity that cost him everything. One day I walked into his room, and predictably, he pointed it directly at me. I didn't laugh. I went ballistic and started screaming at him about how dangerous that was. I warned him, with all the rage in the world, that if he ever pointed a weapon at me again, even as a joke, I was going to give him the beating of his life. I was about 5 years older than him. We had grown up together. But that lack of respect for life drove me insane. He just looked at me with an annoyed face, telling me to calm down, that the gun didn't even work. I didn't listen. I kept lecturing him about safety, about the fact that guns are not toys. He got fed up with my shouting, turned red with anger, and yelled at me, "It doesn't work!" To prove to me that I was the one overreacting, he put the barrel to his temple and pulled the trigger. The gun worked. It happened less than 3 feet away from me. I saw everything. It wasn't like in the movies. It was a dry sound, a flash, and then a void. He was on life support for a week before his father finally accepted that there was nothing left to do and let him go. By the time he died, his head was the size of a pumpkin due to the swelling. Years have passed, and I can still see the exact moment his face changed right before he pulled the trigger. That mixture of arrogance and stupidity that was erased in a fraction of a second. There is nothing poetic about watching someone you've known your whole life blow their brains out over a tantrum. My head hasn't been right since that day. Every time I hear a metallic click, I feel like the world stops. Cultural note. In the United States, firearm safety is often condensed into the 4 golden rules, the first and most important being, treat every firearm as if it were loaded. This story is a textbook example of normalization of deviance, where a person repeats a dangerous behavior, pointing a broken gun without immediate negative consequences until it becomes a tragedy. The mention of the head being the size of a pumpkin refers to the extreme cranial edema swelling that occurs after a traumatic brain injury. a grim reality often omitted in fictional media, but deeply traumatic for real-life witnesses. If you like these stories, make sure to subscribe to the Reddit Oracle.